Welcome to the Save Childhood podcast with Jennifer McCarville. Because childhood has changed, but children have not.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Save Childhood podcast.
I'm Jennifer McCarville.
And I'm Nicole Dugan, and today we are talking about kind of a heavy topic, death and dying, and how to help children through situations like that, how to talk to children about death and dying.
I mean, it's a heavy topic, but it's an important part of life. And we really want to help children be able to navigate the emotions that come with death and dying and to understand what exactly it means, because it's a season of life that I honestly feel often is overlooked, brushed under the carpet, just kind of swept under the rug, brushed under the carpet. What do you do with those things? But that we just want to get through because it can be so emotionally hard. And yet we need to develop some emotional competencies around that and what to do with the feelings of losing someone or something that meant a lot to us.
Yeah, for sure. And we do know that a young child's perception of death and dying is very different from an adult's.
Absolutely, very, very different.
Yeah.
And one of the big ways is they don't understand it's permanent. You know, that's a big thing. They don't understand is a lot of us will struggle with what exactly happens after you die, you know, those things. But all they're thinking about is, well, they're right here.
Right. And you may have heard in episode 6 about our critters and animals on campus and what we do when one dies.
Yes, we briefly talked about that.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk more in detail about that today, and then why it's so important, how we support children and families after that experience here, and different resources that we have.
Yes, we're going to share some resources in the notes. We'll have a list of books that we recommend and things like that.
So. Yeah. So let's talk about when an animal dies at our school.
When an animal dies? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, most people have had a goldfish die or something like that at home. And so when animals die at school, whether it's a pet we have or, a cricket that the children found or a dead frog, etc., we always take time to acknowledge that something died. That we want to just model consistent reverence and respect for something that's died. Yeah. We will stop with the children and tell, oh, he is dead. I can tell that she's dead because she's not moving anymore. And you can see that when you touch her, she doesn't do anything. Just pointing out very clear, concrete things with the youngest children about what it means for something to be dead.
And one tip that you always share is to use the words dead or died and not passed away or passed on.
Or we lost grandma. That's a really hard one. Children are very concrete. So when we say to them, oh, we lost grandma, they think grandma's lost somewhere, right? So we want to be sure that with, especially again, the youngest children, I would say through 5-6 years old, that we're saying, grandma died. And a lot of people will say passed away. And if you're going to use that terminology, then you should explain it to your children. You should say, well, a lot of times when someone or something dies, people will say they passed away. And that means that they've gone to heaven is, our belief. And so what that means for your family. But if you're going to use that term, I would definitely not use the term lost.
Okay.
But it's more important to actually call it what it is and help the children process it.
Yeah.
Right.
And we don't want to bombard them with information either.
No, you really should never do that. You want to be really careful that you answer their questions as simply as possible.
Okay.
We know children ask questions and we often misinterpret the question. I've done that. But we misinterpret the question, so we give them way more information than they needed. It's not even accurate or applicable to the topic. But I know I kind of got off there, so let's get back to what we do when an animal dies here. So when an animal dies that's a pet, I talked about if we come across one, we stop and point it out. We'll often move the body out of the way with a shovel or, just move it over so it can decompose, etc. And so that's what we do when we come upon things in just the nature, the natural outdoor environment, etc. But when it is one of our pets, we have a very specific tradition that we do with the children. We let them look at the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, we have the body in a safe way that an adult holds it. So we might have it wrapped in a towel or in a box. Often we'll put it in a box and hold it. And we'll often just sit in the outdoor classroom, or usually the outdoor classroom is the best place. And children can come up and they can look at it and et cetera. And we talk about it like, oh, well, Phyllis died. She's dead. This is her body. She doesn't need her body anymore. And, whatever your faith beliefs are, ours are that when something dies, it no longer needs its body, and its soul goes to heaven to be with God. And so we're able to say, with a lot of comfort and assurance, so, and of course there are lots of people who will say, well, we don't know what happens to an animal's soul, or et cetera. Okay, but these children are young, and that's a very theological conversation to have that's well beyond what we need to burden them with. Right now, what they need to learn is what it means for something to die. And we want to connect that to what it means when a human will die. So, children are very smart and very capable. They also deserve not to be burdened with adult issues, concepts, big things that are just so bizarre for them to even process. So it doesn't mean telling your children the truth doesn't mean telling them everything.
Mm-hmm.
It means telling them appropriately what they're ready to handle, because they don't need to feel like this world is so big and these concepts are so heavy that I can't even process them or, make sense of them. That's really mentally unhealthy for children. So we will say, well, he doesn't need his body anymore. His soul is in heaven with God, with Jesus. And so we talk about, he can't move, he doesn't breathe anymore, and all those things. Then when it's time, we will gather around and put the body in the middle of the group. And we'll talk about it, and we'll all hold hands, anybody who wants to come to the funeral, and we'll talk about specific things about that animal. Anybody who wants to contribute can add something like, Phyllis was a good chicken. And then we have this ritual after every comment of singing, goodbye, Phyllis, goodbye, or whoever the animal was. And then when it's finished, we say a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And we... someday we'll have a cemetery for our pets here. I'm determined about that. We don't right now. But what we do is we bury the animal somewhere on campus where the children know, and the children decorate a stone to put where that animal is buried. So they can go visit, and we just continue to talk about it. And I don't know if in our Critters and Animals episode we talked about this, but I know you remember the year that in the kindergarten, the cottage class, one of the years you were teaching that age level, the children gathered together and had their own funeral for some critters. Like, I think, was it a grasshopper? I can't remember what it was.
Some insect, for sure.
Some insect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they had their own, and they organized it and invited everyone, and it was pretty precious.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about like fully emotionally competent. We have to help children develop those abilities to deal with the big happy feelings, the sad feelings, the scary feelings, the feeling of grief and sadness. And just that children, 5-year-old children, would see an insect that had died and realize that life matters and stop to have a funeral and pray for the animal. They knew exactly what to do to help process that.
Right. And when children have the experience of a pet dying, they've walked through that experience, they've learned from it, and then it makes it, when a person in their life dies, more manageable.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And I can't tell you, every time something like this happens, we also send an email to the parents that day explaining what happened and what we did. Every time we have parents who thank us, like, oh my gosh, our cat died 4 years ago, and every day our child asks, and we haven't known how to handle that or how to help them, because we give them this information bulleted very, specifically. Here are the words we use. We call it dying. We say they've died or that there's death, and we talk about our faith because of what we believe and we know about Jesus. Their soul is in heaven and they don't need this body anymore. This was just their house on earth. And, but we just go very gently, don't bombard, all of these things. So we're sharing this information always with parents, wanting to help give them the educational piece of this is the language we're using, and you can, we can align for our children in these ways. And they thank us every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we know that's how we handle it with our animals and our critters here, but let's talk a little bit about how we support children when a person in their life dies. And we've had some big situations to deal with here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've had sudden death of parents. We've had, illnesses. That's infrequent, thank goodness. But yeah, it's been, life happens wherever we are with children.
Right.
And so we talked about the language we use, never saying we lost grandpa or etc., but using the actual language of died and passed away if you must. I know that's really important to a lot of people. And
talking about your feelings with your child. Grandma died, I miss her, I'm feeling sad today about it.
That's so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times adults feel like we don't want them to see us cry, we don't want them to see sadness, but being sad and grieving is part of life. And so for, them to walk in and you're crying, or for you to talk to them about it and you start to cry, letting them know, like, I'm really sad, I really miss her, I really miss him. We recently had a death in our family and took our 4-year-old granddaughter, and my daughter prepared her very well on the way. Like, some people are going to be sad at during some of this funeral, and some people are going to cry, and that's okay. Sometimes we cry when we're sad, and sometimes they're going to cry because they're happy and they have happy memories, and it reminds them of how much they're going to miss that person being here, but we'll see them again when we go to heaven. But saying goodbye is hard, and so that language with them is really important. It's really important also to understand that it's going to be hard for them, and they might laugh and they might do something, that's silly, but that's okay because they're learning. And I remember when my grandfather died, my 22-year-old nephew now was 3 at the time. And in our family, we do have a viewing, and so my father, it was his father. So my father and I walked up, and I was holding my nephew, and his mama was there beside us. And so we walked up to the coffin, and we were explaining to him, so it's just his body. He's not here anymore. All of his insides, all of the things that we know about him, the things like his laughter and his voice and the way you felt when you were around him, that's his soul. And it's in heaven now. And he just doesn't need this body anymore. And he's not really understanding this, of course, but that's okay. So he reaches down and he honks my grandfather's nose. He just reaches out, grabs his honk. And, it was precious. We chuckled, and it was just what my dad needed, I think, at the moment it was such a delight. Like, what a normal human response, right? This is what my grandfather always did with him. He honked his nose whenever he saw him. It was something they played. And so there he is, he's not moving. Here's my chance. So anyway, we just chuckled, because he didn't respond. So there's a lesson in that too. But what a beautiful thing that we were able to start that child on a path of normalizing death and being able to process it and interact with it in an age appropriate way without freaking out, it's like we have to pause and think, this reaction is what they do at this age. And to embrace that as we gently teach these really hard concepts.
Right.
So, but yeah, so those are some really important ways to help children navigate through adults dying and animals dying. I think another really important thing we need to do is read books about things dying when you're not dealing with that. We get in those moments and we have these big feelings about it, and we bring out 12 books about, dying and death, and that's overwhelming. But yet, if just like any other time when you're working with children and you're helping them deal with big feelings, etc., you have the meaty conversations outside of the conflict.
Right.
You have them in reflection, maybe, and not a punitive way. You have them beforehand in reading stories or having experiences. What would you have done? How do you think that would make you feel? You do those things outside of the big feeling moments, because in those moments, we're operating from our emotional brain, which is the limbic brain, and the logical brain is not engaged. So if we're in a really emotional place, it is very hard for lots of us, no matter our ages, but especially for young children, it's almost impossible for them to gain that information, because they absolutely go into their emotional brain and they can't hear anything we're telling them. So we want to make sure reading those books and having those stories. Some people will say, oh, but I don't want to make them sad just for no reason. No, you're helping make them emotionally competent and fully able to handle their feelings. And that's a good thing.
Right.
So, and they can ask the questions because it's not emotionally charged for you in the moment. Another thing I recommend to parents is to, when your children become 4, 5, 6 years old, and it depends on your child and if they can sit through this, take them to the funeral of someone they don't know. So if, 4 is a little young, and my granddaughter impressively was very quiet through the funeral. I wouldn't do that if they couldn't be, because it's not their fault. But they're not wired to sit still like that. So you can take them, you can walk outside with them, be respectful of the family, what have you. But if it's a distant relative, etc., a friend you want to support, but you don't know the person that died, really consider taking probably your 5, 6, 7-year-old with you, because that's how they'll begin to learn what it looks like to go to a funeral, what it looks like. And, I always laugh and say, well, don't go to funerals of strangers. That's just weird and rude. But,
right.
It might be somebody that you think, oh, they don't even know them. They don't need to do that. But there are times, weigh that. Consider that as an option to help your child process the possibility of what that might be like when
Sure.
when they have someone that they love die.
Sure.
So read them books, stories, share with them. Somebody died that somebody loved and they're in heaven now, but don't go into great detail. Don't drag it out. Don't, you just little bits.
Little pieces at a time.
Little pieces at a time. You never want to swamp them with details and information that's heavy, especially.
Yeah.
So, and anything we can do to normalize this process of death, preparing for it, talking about it. I mean, I've had a hard time with that growing up. It's hard when your parents say, we've arranged for our funeral. You're like, I don't want to talk about that. But you're going to die. So we have when we get pregnant, we have these 9 months to plan for the arrival of a baby, and it's life-changing, right? And we're planning that and we're doing that. And I believe that when we can look at the end of life as a time of preparation and open conversation and love and reflection and acknowledgement, then we're fully human. Like from the beginning to the end, it's fully human experiences that we know how to cope with. And so for us to sprinkle it in kind of throughout life, it is so very normal, and it's happening. It's going to happen.
Yeah. So we'll put some resources in the notes about books that we recommend.
We sure will.
And that really wraps it up for today. Or did you have one more thing?
No, I was just going to say we do have lots of books that we recommend. I will say for children with pets, one of my favorites is Goodbye Mousie. That's a really sweet story. Another one is Saying Goodbye to Lulu, and that's a hard book. We do try to read it, to the children before, we wait until we've built that relationship at the beginning of the year, and then we try to read it sometime in the late fall. But it has some big feelings to deal with about the family dog dying. And we have 2 kiddos in particular who are adults now. And they still will say, I hate that book. I hate that Saying Goodbye to Lulu because it broke their hearts so much. And their siblings, and it's just the way their family really took that in. Maybe other children have struggled with it too. But what they're really saying is, it was so hard to deal with those feelings. Like, I understood how hard that was.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's okay. You know, they may hate the book, but they have the lesson in their souls to help navigate that through. Like, I'm not alone, and other people feel this way too.
Right.
But you can read them beforehand and choose some to sprinkle here and there. And I think books about all kinds of feelings.
Right.
I need to remember that.
I agree.
But yeah, so anyway, but we will include a list. We'll include a list in the notes from the podcast.
Yeah. And be sure to subscribe, comment, share with others who are passionate about saving childhood like we are.
Yeah, and check out our 14 tenets. They're kind of our framework for the things we know that we can all do to save childhood at savechildhood.org.
And let's keep the conversation going. You can find us on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and our podcast episodes release every Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Central Time on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So we look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, we'll be back next week. Thanks so much. Y'all have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. To learn more and join the movement, go to savechildhood.org.